Hello and welcome back. It is Bible Scribe. Thank you for joining me. I'm going to do this video on why Israel is not in North America. There is a very strong concept going around the internet right now that somehow the biblical lands, we've been lied to about them all our lives, and that the entire world has been duped essentially since the time of Christ to believe that the biblical lands were in Palestine when they actually were in North America. So that's the concept that I'm going to attack in this video. I really do not have any interest in this topic whatsoever. I do not think that the idea that Israel or the biblical lands are located in North America has any merit whatsoever. But I'm doing this for people who are interested, people who are seeing this topic being talked about online and maybe need to see the other side of the coin. So that's what this video is about. I will be going into the different categories of biblical geography, archaeology, historical records, both non-biblical texts and inscriptions and places in the Levant. I will be looking at, scrolling through my notes, linguistics and genetics of the region. We will be looking at New Testament evidence, specifically Paul's missionary journeys that provide us ample evidence of where the biblical lands are. And we will also then address the claim itself at the end as to directly why it really fails and falls on itself. We will also find that some independent ancient sources from multiple ancient civilizations in the Middle East all confirm the Middle Eastern geography for the biblical lands. And then we will have a small discussion towards the end about the real fundamental reason that people promote the idea online, the real reason that people talk about it online, and that is that we will address the idea that the Jews rewrote our history and somehow hid everything from everybody since the time of Christ. So that's what we'll be going through in the video. And if you are a doubter, if you're a skeptic about what I'm going to say, or you totally believe that Israel is in North America or always was, and we're just duped and we've been tricked, then I would ask that as I go through evidence that you will not simply hear one thing you think you can argue against and then leave the video. I hope that you will stay to the end, because what you will see is that the preponderance of the evidence, the overwhelming evidence, is that the Middle East is the biblical lands, and that we have not been lied to about that crucial fundamental fact. In fact, it would be way too hard for someone to actually try to change that fact of history, but that's beside the point. Let's get into some of the reasons why Israel is not located in North America. Let's start briefly with the geography of the Middle East. Let's go ahead and bring up a few things. See, there are things like the River Jordan that flows from Mount Hermon to the Dead Sea. Of course, it's described that way in the Bible, and that's exactly what we see in the Middle East with the Jordan River. The Euphrates, it's in the exact location described in the Bible. The Mediterranean Sea, it is in the location in every instance mentioned in the Bible that we would expect it to be, based on a Middle East location of the biblical lands. The Dead Sea, which has huge mounds of salt all around the edges, not only is exactly where we would expect it to be in the biblical lands based on the Bible and other writings actually many other writings. We're going to look at a couple of those, and historical writers from before the time of Christ, thousands of years into our history. They have all written about the Dead Sea being in the Middle East and being the location of Sodom and Gomorrah and all of the destruction that God wrought upon them. And so those kinds of things are hard to deny. We have like Mount Sinai. We have Mount Sinai in Saudi Arabia, Jabal el-Lawz. We have found the place where the top of the mountain is burnt. And there are excavations that have shown that there were Hebrew people worshiping and sacrificing animals at the foot of this mountain. Now, this has been found in the Middle East. Nothing like it has been found in North America. Mount Carmel, Mount Nebo. This is Mount Hermon. Has been found in the Middle East exactly where it's described in the Bible. Mount Ararat, where Noah and his sons landed in the ark. In fact, excavations by multiple researchers have found what they think are the remains of the ark on this mountain in the Middle East, exactly where we would think it would be based on the traversal of Noah and his sons from that location to then spreading out, creating civilizations that became the basis of things like Babylon, which was southeast of this location, the Levant and Palestine, which was southwest of this location. I mean, it is in the exact location we would expect it to be if the Bible is true. These locations, all that we have mentioned, and many, many more, we obviously shouldn't have to mention them all, are easily verifiable in Palestine, in the Levant, in the Middle East. And they have been identified by writers and historians for millennia, not decades, not centuries, but millennia. And so for people to say that there is not the verifiable evidence of the geography, it's kind of silly. The geography is all there. It's only now that some people have started to come up with these ideas, but it's almost like they haven't read the writings and seen the references in the past in history that all make this plain as day. And so that's actually the foundation of why we believe the Middle East, and we take it for granted that the Middle East is the location of the biblical lands. Now, another thing to be said for this discussion is that not only are these locations where we would expect them to be, but we have references to them, as I mentioned, from ancient documents. These are the letters of Amarna. The reason they're called that is because they were found in Egypt in a location named Amarna, which is shown here. It's on the map here. You can see where in Egypt it was found. This is obviously not North America. This is found in Egypt. And these tablets, which are the letters of Amarna, they document the same places that are in the Bible. They document the locations. They document the same regional relationships of these geographical things. And so it confirms the things in the Bible. That's one of the reasons these letters on tablets here were so, such a profound discovery, because it confirmed yet again all the things we already knew about the biblical lands and the Bible and all these different things. They are dated to 1350 or so BC. 1,350 years before Christ is the dating on these tablets. So whether you believe the dating is accurate or not, they obviously were pre-Christ, 100%. Now, you can argue that those dates are not right, but there really can't be much deviance in those dates based on the place and the location and the archaeology of what was found at that location. So these are pre-Christ references that confirm the biblical lands found in Egypt. They weren't found in North America. Now, another thing related to geography was that if we look at biblical travel times in the Old Testament and directions, like where do you go to get to what and how long does it take to get there, what we find is that, for instance, these travel times relate very well to the Middle East and the locations that we know from tradition as well as archaeology and literature. They match those locations. They match all the distances in the Bible. So we have in the Bible these travel times taking from a few weeks to a few days, etc. So depending on the location, so we can judge distances based on how long it takes people to travel on foot or by animal, by horse or camel. But these distances only fit the Middle East. They do not fit North America. And as well, you have to imagine, well, if someone traveled from Egypt to Moab, well, that journey in the Middle East with the accepted biblical lands is maybe a couple weeks. But how would a person travel from Egypt to North America if North America was the actual biblical lands? That doesn't make any sense. Of course, I would assume that the people that hold this view would argue that Egypt is also in North America, which is absolutely preposterous, seeing as we have hundreds and hundreds of artifacts, relics, and buildings and sculptures and statues that show us, including the Great Pyramid, that Egypt is exactly where we think it is. It's not in North America. So, travel times in the Middle East between what we call now Palestine or Jerusalem, for instance, to, say, Egypt would not work if you think that Israel or Jerusalem is in North America. Those travel times don't work. The distances don't work. The relationship of the places don't work. Now, another thing geographically to think about is Deuteronomy chapter 8, verses 7 through 9 describe a land of wheat, barley, vines, and fig trees. A land whose, as it says, stones are iron, and out of whose hills you can dig copper. Now, every single one of these things matches resources found in the Middle East. I mean, word for word. But then when you go to America, you don't find those resources. And by the way, those Amarna letters, the tablets that were found from 1400 years before Christ, they confirm the same types of resources in them. So they confirm those resources being in the Middle East, and the Middle East being the location where those resources were gathered. Deuteronomy 8, verses 7 through 9 talk about what we might call the 7 species of the promised land. It talks about wheat, barley, grapevines, fig trees, pomegranates, olive trees, date, honey. These are all old world crops, and they were native to the Fertile Crescent and the area of the Levant. They represent actually some of the earliest domesticated plants in the Middle East, not in America. These things were never grown in America. Olive trees, which actually, they can live for thousands of years. An olive tree can live that long, thousands of years. They still grow in Israel today on ancient terraces from those time periods. So we know that olive trees were indicative of this area and were not anywhere else in the world like they were in the Middle East, especially not North America. The Bible also prominently talks about the cedars of Lebanon used to build Solomon's temple in 1 Kings 5. It talks about hyssop, acacia, myrtle, and mustard. Now, I know that some of the adherents to this weird theory about Israel or the biblical lands being in North America have tried to locate some of these things in North America. The problem is all of these things exist in the biblical lands of the Middle East, in the currently understood area of the Levant, of Palestine, of Israel. The Bible, by the way, never once mentions any of the native crops of America in any of its writings, or any other writings about biblical lands or the time period. Nobody ever mentions maize or corn or tomatoes or potatoes or tobacco, a staple of American economy, or squash or cacao of South America, the cacao plant, or the staple crops of the pre-Columbian Americas. All of these which would have been impossible to overlook if the biblical authors actually lived there. But they didn't. It wasn't the area they were in. So none of those crops existed, so therefore they were not in the biblical writings. Now, also animals. We could talk about animals. About 100 different species or creatures are described in the Bible, and virtually every single one, like 95% of what's mentioned in the Bible, are native only to the Middle East. The Bible mentions lions over 150 times. These are Asiatic lions, and they roamed the Levant before civilization and became extinct in the region at about the time of the Crusades. That was 1,000 years after Christ. So not only during the time of Christ were these Asiatic lions prowling about, occasionally taking a weary traveler by the roadside, they were native to this land, and they were native to no other. America never had any Asiatic lions in it, nor any lions, period. David and Samson both fought lions in Samuel 17 and Judges 14. The Bible mentions leopards. These are the Arabian leopards. They're actually still in the region, but critically endangered at the present. Syrian brown bears in 2 Kings chapter 2. Jackals, wolves, gazelles, ibex, and wild asses. Rock hyraxes in Psalm 104. Ostriches, crocodiles, and hippopotamus. And this is in Egyptian context in Job 40 and Ezekiel 29. Camels, donkeys, sheep, and goats. And because the land of Israel sits at the intersection of Europe, Africa, and Asia, it hosted a unique combination of these species from all three of these continents. Exactly the mix that is described in the Bible and other writings of the time. But crucially, the Bible never mentions American animals that were native to the Americas. We never hear of the bison or the moose or grizzly bears, rattlesnakes, turkeys, cougars, armadillos, raccoons, opossums, any North American species you would expect to hear about if the biblical lands were truly in North America are exquisitely left out of the texts. Now, in regards to agriculture and landscape in the geographical regions discussed in the biblical texts, the Bible describes lands of terraced hillside vineyards and olive groves, seasonal rains, called the former and latter rains in Deuteronomy 11, desert wadis, and Mediterranean coastal plains. The agricultural calendar in the Bible, planting wheat and barley in autumn and harvesting in the spring, with the grape harvest in the summer, the olive pressing in the fall, this matches the Levantine climate perfectly. The climate of Jerusalem and Israel in the Middle East, not North America. You can't even grow some of these things in North America. This doesn't match North American growing culture. It doesn't match the growing seasons. It doesn't match the terrain of North America or the growing agricultural patterns. So, based on the agriculture, the animals we've talked about, the plants that are talked about in the Bible and other writings about the biblical lands, and then simply the locations and distances between places that's mentioned over and over again in these texts, it seems that geography helps us rule out North America as the actual location of the biblical lands. Now we'll talk a little bit about archaeology that has been done in the Middle East in an attempt to show the artifacts mentioned in the Bible and other writings, these physical locations of cities and buildings, because there's a lot of physical evidence in the biblical lands that we know. There is not the same physical evidence in North America. So one famous place that has been found in the biblical lands of the Middle East is Jericho, the city of Jericho. This tell in this photo, this mound, is where Jericho existed. It was fortified. It had walls that have been discovered. It is located in the Jordan Valley near the Dead Sea, as discussed in the scriptures. Excavations reveal evidence of collapsed walls, just as the scriptures tell us, from about 1400 BC, that match the account in Joshua chapter 6 perfectly. Multiple excavation campaigns by Garstang in the 30s, Kenyon in the 50s, and then later work have all documented the site's Bronze Age fortifications, buried grain stones, and fallen mud brick walls. All of this has been excavated and found to be accurate according to the scriptures. And one of the other amazing archaeological discoveries in the Middle East that supports the Bible and all supporting writings is the discoveries of different fortified cities that are mentioned in the Bible, like this one, Hazor. Another view of Hazor, the fortified city of Megiddo, and the city of Lachish. All of these have been discovered in the locations in which the Bible described them relative to the other cities in the area. We don't have any of this kind of evidence in North America. Hazor was in northern Galilee. It was the largest of the Canaanite cities. You can see the large stones here that would have been unmovable by humans, but are movable by giants. It suffered massive destruction by fire. You can even see the fire burn across the tops of these pillars in this photo. And this was found to have happened in the 13th century BC and aligns with Joshua chapter 11, verses 10 through 13 perfectly. Now, Megiddo sits in the Jezreel Valley and shows 26 different layers of habitation spanning 5,000 years of history, including the era of Solomon, with gates and stables that have been found and excavated. Nothing like this has been excavated in North America. This was Judah's second most important city. So, of course, the tradition of the Jews was very strong. They knew exactly where this location was. And lo and behold, it has been found and excavated. Now, the city of Lachish in this photo was destroyed by the Assyrians in 701 BC. And it was so celebrated that King Sennacherib commissioned enormous stone relief carvings of the siege for his palace walls in Nineveh. So these palace walls that depict the destruction of Lachish were found in Nineveh in the Middle East, not in North America. So we have two cities involved. One city in the Middle East that has relief sculptures of the destruction of another city right there in the Middle East, and we have the evidence, archaeological evidence of the destruction of that city that matches the relief and matches everything in the scriptures related to it. So yet again, this type of evidence is almost unbreakable in terms of proof that the biblical lands were what was being talked about in the Middle East. It had nothing to do with North America. Now, if we, of course, look at Jerusalem itself, there are many, many excavations that are not only have been done in the past, but are ongoing even in the present day. Now, of course, a lot of these excavations are the Jewish people trying to prove their heritage to that land. So, of course, they're doing ongoing excavations there. And it is a huge tourism boom for people to come from all over the world to see these sites. The City of David excavations have been going on since the 1800s. They've revealed Iron Age walls, step stone structures like this, the Western Wall, actually, is the surviving retaining wall of Herod's Temple Mount, right? And this was built in the 1st century. So we know even at that level that at the 1st century, this was definitely the location that all of these things were happening. It was tied to Herod. Herod didn't have a palace in North America. There's no remains of any palaces in North America. I mean, this is what we come to with this discussion. It just gets a little silly, but all of these things in, Jerusalem proper have been found that match biblical teaching. The Pool of Siloam is one that has been found that matches the biblical narrative. We found coins struck during Pontius Pilate's governorship found in the foundation of the roads. So Pontius Pilate tied to this location and this archaeology tied to the Bible. It's kind of an unbreakable chain of evidence that can't be undone. We've never found a Pontius Pilate coin in North America. We've never found a Jewish temple in North America. This is the Pool of Siloam that has been found and matches all of the descriptions in the scriptures. And this was found in 2004 by workers that didn't even mean to find it. It was an unintentional archaeological discovery. Workers were repairing a sewer pipe south of the Temple Mount, and they started finding steps as they were digging. And, of course, the authorities told them to stop, and they started excavating it. And they found the Pool of Siloam that's described in the Bible in John 9, 1 through 11, where Jesus healed the blind man. Then we have Hezekiah's tunnel. This is called also the Siloam Tunnel. It was a 1,700-foot tunnel chiseled through solid limestone beneath the city of David, and it connected the Gihon Spring to the Pool of Siloam, which you just saw. Now, this was actually referenced in the Bible. It was built by Hezekiah in 700 BC to protect Jerusalem's water supply from the Assyrians. 2 Kings chapter 20, 2 Chronicles chapter 32. There is a Siloam inscription discovered, carved into the tunnel wall. And it's written in ancient Hebrew. And it describes how teams of workers dug from opposite ends of the tunnel and met in the middle. That's how they constructed this tunnel through the limestone. And it still carries flowing water to this day and is a tourist attraction. You can go see it yourself. Now, another one of the most important archaeological discoveries of all times for Christians is the Dead Sea Scrolls. And they were found in the Qumran caves near the Dead Sea, exactly where we would have thought that they should be found in biblical lands. And so this is a discovery made in the 1940s. And of course, you can go see all of these scrolls, and they're still over there. They didn't cart them over to North America to say that they were North American scrolls. They didn't find them in North America. And the crazy part of this whole discussion is going to be that, if you look at the Dead Sea Scrolls, you will see that throughout, not when they were discovered actually, but if you look at some of the arc of the trajectory of the restoration of the Dead Sea Scrolls, there were some times when, for instance, the Rockefeller Foundation got involved with the preservation of the Dead Sea Scrolls. If I'm not mistaken. Obviously, Jewish authorities were involved at some level. The original discovery had nothing to do with these people. And I would contend that, if you think that the whole thing's a hoax, that you should do some of the research of that history and find out when things were found, who brought them forward. When did the, rich, wealthy people get involved with it? It was not when it was certainly first found. It was afterwards. So, even if we take this whole piece of evidence of the Dead Sea Scrolls and we throw it out, of course, the arguments are going to be overwhelming that the Middle East is correctly the biblical lands. But when you add this into it, it's just, it's mind-boggling. Everything about the Bible and the biblical lands and the artifacts and the archaeology has all been found exactly where we thought it would be, in the Middle East. Now, one thing archaeologically that I actually was somewhat unaware of until I started doing this research was that many personal seals, like the seals that a king would use to press into, the side of a scroll or onto a door of a secret room or something like that to seal it shut in the name of the king so that people wouldn't do things, those seals have been found for many, even characters in the Bible. And guess where they were found? They were found in the Middle East. This right here is Hezekiah's bulla, his seal. A clay seal impression discovered in the Ophel excavations at the foot of the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, led by a man named Elliot Mazar. The bulla or seal measures over a centimeter in diameter and reads in Hebrew, belonging to Hezekiah, son of Ahaz, king of Judah. This was found in Jerusalem in the Middle East. Now we also have the Isaiah bulla. I'm sorry, that was the wrong picture. This is the Hezekiah bulla. My mistake. Now this is the Isaiah bulla. This was found just 10 feet from Hezekiah's bulla or seal in the same excavation. This seal reads belonging to Isaiah, and it does have partially damaged letters. The full reading is assumed to be belonging to the Isaiah the prophet. Okay. And this does remain in debate because it's broken and there's partial words on part of it. However, the word Isaiah is clear in this inscription. This was found in Jerusalem in the Middle East. Now this is the Baruch bulla or seal. Now this is the writer Baruch who wrote the books of Baruch, assumedly. The seal impression reads belonging to Berechiah, I don't know how to pronounce that, but it's Berechiahu, which translates to Baruch for us, son of Neriyahu the scribe. So Berechiahu Baruch, son of Neriyahu, identified as son of Neriah, the personal scribe of the prophet Jeremiah in the Bible, Jeremiah 36, verse 4 and 32. It actually has a fingerprint in it. Of course, there is speculation that it is actually Baruch's own fingerprint in the back of the clay. Now, that's hard to know for sure, but this was found also in the Middle East. This is the seal of Gemariah, son of Shaphan, and it was found among a horde of 51 other seals discovered in the 586 BC destruction remnants or artifacts in Jerusalem. The seal reads belonging to Gemariah, son of Shaphan. Gemariah, son of Shaphan, the scribe, is named in Jeremiah 36, verses 10 through 12, as a royal official in whose chamber Baruch read Jeremiah's scroll. This was found in Jerusalem, dated to 586 BC. None of these scrolls or seals were found in North America. This is the Bethlehem seal or bulla. A small seal clay impression discovered in the city of David, bearing the inscription Bat Lechem, which is Bethlehem, dating to the late 8th or 7th century BC. This is found in Bethlehem with the seal on it that says the word Bethlehem. So this is the first time actually in archaeological discoveries that the name Bethlehem has appeared outside the Bible. So it was a major discovery on many levels. And I should correct that. It's the first time that the name Bethlehem has appeared outside the Bible in a First Temple period inscription. So I had to clarify there. It appears to be a fiscal seal marking a shipment of goods from Bethlehem to the king in Jerusalem. So, just just to say that these seals are quite compelling evidence, all having been found in the Middle East, in Jerusalem or close thereby, and they have no relationship whatsoever to North America, but they have every kind of relationship to the Bible and to these ancient people that we know from the Bible and to the locations mentioned in the Bible and the physical locations in the Middle East that we all know as the biblical lands. Now, we also have some New Testament archaeological finds that should be mentioned. Things that are directly related to the narrative of the New Testament. The first is the Pilate stone, found in 1961, a limestone block discovered at the Caesarea Maritima. Now, this is not Jerusalem. This is a coastal city on the Mediterranean, northwest from Jerusalem, on the coast of the Mediterranean, Caesarea Maritima. It bears a Latin inscription reading Pontius Pilate, Praefectus Judae. Obviously, Pontius Pilate, the prefect of Judea. This is the only contemporary first century archaeological artifact ever found mentioning Pontius Pilate by name and confirming his title and his post. The original has now been moved to the Israel Museum in Jerusalem. A replica still stands in Caesarea. Now, this is the Caiaphas ossuary. During the construction of a recreational water park south of Jerusalem, a bulldozer broke through the roof of a first century tomb, and inside were 12 ossuaries, 12 different bone boxes of different people, including this ornately, decorated one that was inscribed in Aramaic and said Joseph of Caiaphas, Joseph, son of Caiaphas. So inside were the bones of 6 different people, including those of a 60-year-old man believed to be Caiaphas, the high priest that presided over the trial of Jesus Christ, your Savior, in Matthew 26 and John 18. Josephus records that Caiaphas' full name was Joseph Caiaphas, and that he served as high priest from 18 to 36 AD. So that, of course, confirms the name Joseph that is on the box, Joseph, son of Caiaphas, or Joseph Caiaphas. And this ossuary is also in the Israel Museum in Jerusalem. This is called the Crucified Man of Givat HaMivtar, discovered in 1968. It was found in an ossuary and is the skeleton of a man named Yohanan, son of Hagkol. It is obviously a right heel bone with a 7-inch Roman iron nail driven through it. So it confirms that crucifixion was practiced exactly like the Gospels describe it. And of course, this was found east of Jerusalem. And so it proves that crucifixions were done in this area of the world. However, we have not found any evidence of crucifixions being done in North America, in any part of North America. So that's unfortunate for this view. This is called the House of God Ostracon. It's a 3,000-year-old pottery fragment discovered at the site of the biblical city Arad in the Negev desert. It bears an inscription in ancient Hebrew referring to the house of God or the temple. Arad was a Judean fortress on the southern border, and the Ostracon is an administrative note mentioning supplies being sent to the temple in Jerusalem. And so this is from 1,000 years before Christ, evidence that the area we're talking about in the Middle East, yet another artifact that describes the temple in Hebrew. What more could you want? So in summary, just of the entire section here, in total, professional archaeological excavations all over the Middle East have produced hundreds and hundreds of artifacts bearing biblical names, confirming the existence of dozens of biblical sites cities at their precise biblical locations, and unearthed physical infrastructure like the tunnels, walls, pools, and roads, and they're all the same as what's described in Scripture. The sheer density of the evidence concentrated in this geographical area, the size of New Jersey. Remember, it's the size of New Jersey. And of course, all the travel times in the Bible confirm that size to be correct. This constitutes an overwhelming archaeological record that the Middle East is the biblical lands. Not a single comparable artifact has ever been found in North America, archaeologically. All right, now for historical records. Now, these are non-biblical texts and inscriptions that place events in the Levant, in the Middle East, and of course, none of them place anything in North America, as we will see. Let's start with Egyptian records. This is the Merneptah Stele. It is from 1200 BC, a granite slab over 10 feet tall. And you can see how much writing is on this stele. It was erected by Pharaoh Merneptah, son of Ramses II, at Thebes in Egypt. Now we're talking about Egypt, that's in the Middle East. It contains the earliest known non-biblical mention of Israel as a distinct people in Canaan. So this is a stele, a granite slab 10 feet tall from Thebes in Egypt in the Middle East that mentions Israel. And it mentions them as a distinctive people in Canaan. It says, Israel is laid waste and his seed is not. The determinative hieroglyph used for Israel indicates a people, not a city or a land, confirming that a group called Israel existed in Canaan by the late 13th century BC. This stele is not in Israel, it's in the Egyptian Museum in Cairo. But it, of course, confirms the existence of Israel in Canaan, in the Middle East, not in North America. Now, this is called the Medinet Habu reliefs, found to have been from 1178 BC. Massive wall carvings at the mortuary temple of Ramses III in Thebes, also, depicting the Egyptian battle against sea peoples, including the Philistines. The reliefs show that the Philistines, with their distinctive feathered headdresses, being defeated and subsequently settling the Levantine coast exactly where the Bible places them. Places like Astaroth, Gath, all those places are up and down the coast of the Mediterranean just west of Jerusalem and Israel in Palestine. And this relief shows that exact thing. Tells the story of the Philistines who settled in those areas, confirming the Bible and confirming the Middle East locations of the things in the Bible. Now this is the Shishak I relief. From 925 BC, a triumphal relief at the Temple of Karnak in Thebes, listing over 150 cities conquered by Pharaoh Shishak I during his campaign into Israel and Judah. The campaign is recorded in 1 Kings chapter 14, if you'd like to read it from the Bible's perspective, and 2 Chronicles 12. They describe Shishak, king of Egypt, attacking Jerusalem and plundering the temple. This Karnak list includes recognizable biblical place names all throughout the Negev and northern Israel. So all the names in here match the names of different cities and places all throughout the region. So that was Egyptian records. Now let's look at some Assyrian records. Again, it's important to see these archaeological records given by peoples that hated the Jews and warred against the Jews. It should make the evidence even stronger that we're talking about the right peoples and places. But these are the Assyrian records that have been found. This is the Kirk monolith of Shalmaneser III from 853 BC, a limestone stele discovered in 1861 near Diyarbakir, Turkey, now in the British Museum. Now, this one's not in Israel, it's not in Egypt, it's in the British Museum. It describes the Battle of Karkar, in which a coalition of 12 kings fought against the Assyrian army. Among the coalition members is Ahab the Israelite, the one mentioned in the Bible, Ahab, King Ahab, who contributed 2,000 chariots and 10,000 infantry, making him one of the most powerful members of this alliance during this battle. This is the earliest known Assyrian reference to an Israelite king. And Ahab is, of course, described in 1 Kings chapters 16 through 22, if you want to look that up. This is the black obelisk of Shalmaneser III from 841 BC. It's 6.5 feet tall. It's black limestone. It was discovered at Nimrud, ancient Kala, in 1846. And this is now also in the British Museum. It depicts 5 scenes of foreign kings paying tribute. One panel shows Jehu, son of Omri, kneeling before Shalmaneser III, offering tribute. And this, of course, is the Jehu from the Bible. His revolt against the house of Ahab is described in 2 Kings 9 through 10. Now, this is Sargon II's Annals, a relief sculpture from 722 BC. Inscriptions from the palace of Sargon II at Khorsabad record the conquest and deportation of the northern king of Israel. It says, I besieged and conquered Samaria, led away as booty 27,290 inhabitants of it. This corresponds, of course, to the fall of Israel described in 2 Kings 17, verses 3 through 6. And this Sargon's prism is now in the Iraq Museum. This is called the Taylor Prism, or Sennacherib's Annals, from 691 BC, a hexagonal clay prism discovered at Nineveh by Colonel Taylor in 1830. Now it's in the British Museum. It records Sennacherib's campaign into Judah in 701 BC in Akkadian cuneiform. It mentions Hezekiah the Judahite, who did not submit to him. He besieged and captured 46 fortified cities, and I shut him up in Jerusalem, his royal city, like a bird in a cage. So this confirms Hezekiah's rebellion in 2 Kings 18, the siege of Lachish and Jerusalem in 2 Kings 18, the tribute Hezekiah paid in 2 Kings 18, 14 through 16. And so another incredible thing that ties the locations and the people together. This is, as we've already discussed, the town of Lachish was destroyed, but this is part of the reliefs that we already looked at that town from 700 BC. And again, a record of Assyrian soldiers with siege ramps, battering rams, Judean defenders on the walls. Judah was defending this city, against the Assyrians. And so this is just another amazing artifact that, again, ties places and people together all across the Levant, the Middle East. Now let's look at some Moabite records, some Moabite and Aramean records. This is the Mesha stele, or the Moabite stone, it's called either, from 840 BC, a black basalt slab discovered in Dibon, Jordan, a totally different country, but also in the Middle East, now in the Louvre in Paris. It was inscribed by King Mesha of Moab and describes his revolt against Israel after the death of Ahab from 2 Kings chapter 3. In the inscription, it mentions Omri, king of Israel, and the house of David. It also, in a different part of the reading, mentions the Israelite God and mentioned the Tetragrammaton, YHWH, Yahweh. It also mentions specific other Moabite and Israelite cities. It is the longest Iron Age inscription ever found in the region and a cornerstone of epigraphy. This is the Tel Dan stele from 841 BC, a basalt inscription discovered in 1993, actually, in Tel Dan, northern Israel, erected by an Aramean king. It contains the phrase House of David. So just another regional artifact that has been found in the area and mentions, of course, the Israelites or the House of David or, the kings of Israel. Nothing like this has ever been found in North America or South America. All right, now these are Babylonian and Persian records from totally different nations. This in front of you is the Nebuchadnezzar Chronicle. It's in the British Museum. It was acquired in 1896. It is a Babylonian chronicle tablet recording the first 11 years of Nebuchadnezzar II's reign. It describes his defeat of Egypt at the Battle of Carchemish, which matches Jeremiah 46, verse 2. It also confirms the first siege of Jerusalem and the deportation of King Jehoiakim in 597 BC, which is recorded in 2 Kings chapter 24. Now this is Joachim's ration tablets from 592 BC. Clay tablets excavated from the royal archives in Babylon by Robert Koldewey in the 1900s, early 1900s. They record the food rations distributed to captives. Among those listed is Joachim, king of the land of Yahud, which is essentially Jehoiakim, king of Judah, okay, and his 5 sons. This confirms 2 Kings chapter 25, verses 27 through 30, that describe Jehoiakim being released from prison and receiving a daily allowance from the king. This is the Nabonidus cylinder. I'm trying to go a little quicker so we can get through this stuff. 550 BC, discovered at Ur. Now this is Ur, like where Abraham came from, far over near Babylon, way far away from, hundreds of miles away from Israel, but also in the Middle East. This was discovered in Ur, and the cylinder contains a prayer of Nabonidus mentioning Belshazzar, his oldest son. And so that, of course, matches the book of Daniel and matches the things talked about in Daniel. Daniel 5:29 talks about Belshazzar. This is the Nebo Sarsachim tablet from 595 BC, found in 2007, actually, pretty recently. A small clay tablet mentioning the chief eunuch Nabu-Sharushu Ukin, which is the same Babylonian official that's listed in Jeremiah 39:3. And he's listed there as Nebo Sarsachim. Of course, it's one of the most obscure names in the entire Bible, but this shows how well preserved the history, the archaeology of the Bible is in this region. We have nothing like it in any sense in the Americas. Now, these are the Lachish letters from the city of Lachish, 588 BC. 21 ostraca, or inscribed pottery fragments, discovered in the gatehouse of Lachish by a British expedition, not by Israelis or Jews, a British expedition, written in Paleo-Hebrew script with iron carbon ink from the time period. These are military dispatches from a Judean outpost officer named Hosea to the garrison commander at Lachish during the final Babylonian invasion of the city. It mentions things that echo directly Jeremiah 34, verse 7, that talk about Lachish and Azekah being the last 2 fortified cities resisting Nebuchadnezzar. Here's another view of it with some of the things written. It mentions Yahweh. It mentions the battle incoming and the fire signals that Lachish is giving, etc., etc. Now, in summary of this section on the historical records we've gone over, I mean, again, it's like in every one of these areas, such overwhelming evidence and connective tissue, not only between these nations, but the people mentioned in the Bible and places mentioned in the Bible. And the connective tissue with all this archaeology in this one geographical region it's ridiculous to ignore this and to pretend that anything like it exists in the Americas. We have nothing like this anywhere else in the world. In fact, you really could say that the archaeological evidence for the biblical lands is probably stronger than the evidence for anything else in the world. Almost no people or place in the world has the type of archaeological evidence that is found in these areas, especially not as far as time frame, going back in history thousands of years, even before Christ. So, pretty overwhelming evidence. And we've mentioned, by the way, 5 different civilizations that all have this evidence that points into the biblical lands: Egyptian, Assyrian, Moabite, Aramean, Babylonian, Persian. We've looked at 6 different types of scripts: cuneiform Hebrew, Paleo-Hebrew, different languages, foreign powers independently recording interactions against and with each other. I mean, I don't know how much better evidence you could have. And again, I want to reiterate that these artifacts are not all held in Jewish museums. They're in the Louvre, they're in the British museums, in Istanbul, they're in the Egyptian Museum in Cairo. They are held by a lot of different peoples and groups and governments. So it's not all concentrated with the Jews, for those of you who are laser focused on the Jews. All right, now a short section here, just a quick mention of linguistics and genetics. I'm not going to take a lot of time here. I didn't flesh this section out because I don't know that much about these topics, but what I did look up was pretty, again, overwhelmingly profound in terms of the Middle East being the biblical lands. As far as linguistics, Biblical Hebrew is a Semitic language, and it's related to ancient Canaanite in terms of the languages. All the languages of that area, Canaanite, Phoenician, Hebrew, they have relationships, okay? And so all of these languages come from that area of the world, all of them. All of the artifacts, as you saw, were in Hebrew, Aramaic, etc., etc. All the Phoenician artifacts generally that we find are in that area of the world. All of the Canaanite artifacts are in that area of the world. All the Egyptian artifacts are in that area of the world. In contrast, there are no Semitic roots whatsoever in any pre-Columbian Native American languages. Those languages are not related to the Semitic languages from the Middle East. There's just not a relationship. So even if there may be some fringe, and I don't know that this is true, there may be some fringe scholars that have tried to connect some kind of, ancient, South American dialect to something in the Middle East, but it's not. There's no majority opinion on that. It's really fringe, and so just the overwhelming knowledge base of linguistics is that all of that came from the Middle East. Now, if we move to genetics, modern Jews, Ashkenazi, Sephardi, Palestinians, also in Gaza, they share ancient DNA from the Levant, from this area of the world. And that includes Canaanite ancestry in some of them. Native Americans descend instead from Asian migrations. And this is, of course, to me, pseudoscience anyway, genetics is, but I'm just telling you, all the geneticists point to that these areas of the world are exactly the biblical lands. Now, if you think, for instance, I just want to bring this up because it came to mind, if you think that the Jews control all genetic testing, and that they are the ones, making genetic testing, making it look like that the Middle East is the biblical lands, then you have to ask yourself, well, why do Jews refuse to allow genetic testing on themselves? Did you know that? Did you know that that many of the Jews, they will not, and I believe in Israel, it's against the law to do genetic testing on them because they're afraid you might find some of their bloodlines coming from Khazarian bloodlines. Now, if the Jews could control all DNA testing, they wouldn't do that. They would just go ahead and let everybody test and they would change the results, right? But they don't have the power to do that. Do you see? Jews don't control DNA testing. They don't control genetics. So geneticists the world over believe that the biblical lands are in the Levant, just like we've always thought, in the Middle East, because all genetics and genetic testing points there for the Semitic background, the background of the Canaanites, the Levant, the Jews and Israelites, etc., etc., etc. It's all in the Middle East. None of it has anything to do with North America. We have some New Testament evidence. And this really centers on something that came to my mind as soon as people started making this argument to me that somehow the real biblical lands are in the Americas and that we've been duped. Everyone's been duped for thousands of years to think that the biblical lands are in Palestine, in the Middle East. And most people that think that are saying that the Jews duped us. But what I'm going to talk to you about in this section is the New Testament evidence of Paul's missionary journeys and his journeys to the Roman world and back to Palestine, from Jerusalem through Turkey, etc., etc. He went to all these places during his missionary journeys in the book of Acts. So you can obviously go there and read the account for yourself. But during Paul's 3 missionary journeys, in Acts 13 to 21, they covered a vast but geographically coherent network of cities across the eastern Mediterranean. In fact, you can trace them with lines because he goes from this one to that one to that one to that one. Every city that Paul visits is a known, archaeologically confirmed location in the Middle East. He goes from Judea, from Jerusalem, to the coastline, to Tyre, to Sidon, to Antioch. He goes into Turkey. He goes into Greece. He goes to Italy. Now, if somehow the biblical lands were North America, then the only way you'd be able to explain that is if you tried to make the point that Italy, Greece, and Turkey are also in North and South America. Because there's no way Paul, in the time frame he had, could have made the missionary journeys from the biblical lands the alleged biblical lands in North America to Greece and to Turkey and to Rome. It's impossible. It doesn't make any sense. The journeys of Paul's radiate outward from 2 hubs, from Jerusalem and from Antioch. So here on the map, let's mark this so we know what we're talking about. We're talking about Jerusalem right here. If you can look and see that on the lower part of your screen, lower right, there's Jerusalem. Here's Antioch up here. He went through Turkey. He went through cities all through Turkey along the coasts. He went to Greece, to Achaia, and to Philippi. He went to Rome. He went to Italy and to Rome. Now, what you would have to assert if you believe that, the biblical lands are North America, you would have to assert that he also went all the way over to North America. So my question would be, how did he do that? How did he did he travel, across the entire Atlantic over here somewhere, and then, or maybe up through the waterways to the Great Lakes? Is that what people are suggesting? And then it just happened to be able to then make the trip back all the way across the Atlantic. It took, as from what I read about Christopher Columbus on the Nina, Pinta, and Santa Maria, it took them about 45 days, if I'm not mistaken, to make the journey across. 45 to 60 days, and I'm not sure if they actually know exactly how many days. But that seems to be what we're talking about here. So if you believe this stuff, then you have to believe that Paul was able somehow to, hit up Antioch, Turkey, Greece, Rome, and then, just jet out by way of the Straits of Gibraltar and across the Atlantic. I mean, this journey would have taken him, this missionary journey would have probably taken him years, a year or two, to go through all this, then out, and then another time back to get back to everything. I mean, it's unbelievable. It's mind-boggling to think of because it's improbable. That's the problem here. This is completely improbable. So as I was researching this, I came up with this, that really the geographic coherence of Paul's journeys is devastating to this theory that North America is somehow the biblical lands. Paul repeatedly sails short distances between known Mediterranean ports, crossing the Aegean Sea, island hopping between Turkey and Grecian coasts, making coastal runs along Phoenicia and Palestine. He travels on established Roman roads like the Via Egnatia in Greece and the Appian Way in Rome. He goes to all these places. And by the way, there's an inscription at Delphi called the Gallio inscription that independently dates Paul's stay in Corinth to approximately 51 AD. So there's some archaeological confirmation that Paul literally was in these areas, literally was in Delphi, literally was in Greece and Rome and the Middle East. He never was in North America. And Paul's letters themselves confirm all the Mediterranean geography, all of it that's described. It matches the geography perfectly. That's why we can trace his missionary journeys in the Middle East, because it all makes sense. So I hope that you can see why, just Paul's missionary journey alone is an unbreakable piece of evidence that should tear the idea that the biblical lands were in North America, should tear that idea to shreds for most people. I don't really understand why it doesn't, but there's that. Now, I think we just needed to circle back for a minute on this one fact, and that's that there are no verified ancient Semitic artifacts, inscriptions, Hebrew artifacts, no biblical matching ruins have ever been found in North America. I don't really know what the people that hold this position think happened. Do you think that they were buried under just layers of dirt and forests and things, and we just haven't found them yet? Is it just some super mystery as to why we can't find any artifacts here that actually would support the idea of this being the biblical lands? A handful of claimed finds do exist, actually, very small ones, but each one that has been seriously examined by mainstream scholars has in general been considered a hoax or a forgery or a misinterpretation. For instance, we have this, which is the Los Lunas Decalogue stone from New Mexico. And it contains Greek letters mixed with Hebrew forms and anachronistic punctuation marks, like full stops and carets. Now, the problem is these punctuation marks did not exist in ancient Hebrew. And so it's very consistent with a forgery. As you can see, even that the rows are not consistent. The lettering doesn't look consistent. There looks to be issues and problems, scratch marks. But this one is considered a forgery. It's not real. Now we also have this, which is called the Bat Creek inscription. It was found in Tennessee, and it was once claimed by scholar Cyrus Gordon to be Paleo-Hebrew or Phoenician. But now it is considered a hoax of the 19th century. There were a lot of people in the 19th century trying to make wild and interesting claims simply to get headlines, things like that. And most scholars say that that's what this one is. And, you know, well, I'll make that point in a second. Let's continue. There's also this, which is called the Paraíba inscription in Brazil. And there were some people that alleged that this was Phoenician writing. But it was dismissed as a forgery as early as 1873. No scholar that had even studied this had ever seen the original, and the letter forms span an impossible 800-year range of Phoenician writing styles. So this one has been totally left alone by the entire scientific and archaeological community because it doesn't represent anything that is archaeologically sound. Any of these inscriptions that even look Phoenician, it's different stuff from different time periods. It doesn't look right. So they won't touch it. It's looked at as a hoax, a forgery. Now, there was a man in the 70s named Barry Fell, and he was making all sorts of claims at this time period that there were widespread Phoenician inscriptions in North America. But this has also been rejected by all professional archaeologists and epigraphers. And critically, even the brief Norse presence in North America left some verified archaeological remains. However, no comparable Phoenician or Hebrew or Israelite site has ever been found anywhere in the Americas. Now let that ring like a bell in your head. No Hebrew, Phoenician, Israelite site where artifacts are just being found. No buildings, no nothing. None of it. Nothing's been found in the Americas. Whereas if we look at what we've already gone through for the Middle East, there has been dozens, hundreds, most likely in the range of thousands and thousands of artifacts, if you count all types, all over the Middle East that point to the Middle East as the biblical lands. Wouldn't we expect to have in North America one single archaeological site that was a Hebrew settlement or maybe we would expect if we knew where Mount Sinai was in North America, we would find what we have already found in Saudi Arabia at Jebel El Lawz, where there is a burn on the top of the mountain where God's presence was, and there is at the bottom of the mountain the remnants of sacrificial trenches for animals and altars, and even inscriptions on stones of calves and different sacrificial techniques that the Jews were using at the time period. Wouldn't we expect to find any of that in North America, near wherever the proposed Mount Sinai is in North America or South America? Yet we have found none. We found nothing like that. We haven't even found just a random Jewish house or Jewish settlement with some pottery shards and some inscriptions. We haven't found anything like that. Now, you can, of course, go back to these 1, 2, 3 things that have been found and look suspicious. Or you can go to the Middle East and you can see hundreds of thousands of things that all are very tight and look correct, have the right languages, have the right time periods, the right names inscribed on them. Now, one other thing that is mentioned in regards to this North American theory is that there are theories by these people that Native Americans are linked to the lost tribes, and this is actually something that Mormons do. They link the Native Americans to the lost tribes of Israel in their writings. But this is debunked by DNA and genetic evidence. There is no genetic marker linking them whatsoever to ancient Israel or ancient Israelites at all. And these ideas often stem from 19th century speculations But they're rejected by all historians and archaeologists. They're fantasy, as is the Mormon religion, really, but we won't get into that. It's just not, there's no evidence of this. All right, now one of the final sections here is independent ancient sources of literature from multiple different civilizations, all confirming Middle Eastern geography related to the biblical lands. Now, one is Herodotus. He wrote in 485 he lived from 485 to 425 BC. He's called the father of history, the earliest Greek writer to describe the biblical lands in detail. He personally traveled through the region and repeatedly refers to Palestine and Syria as a district stretching from the Phoenician area, Phoenicia, to Egypt along the Mediterranean coast. So he mentions Phoenicia, which is Tyre, Sidon, the coastal lands. He mentions along the coast, and he mentions Egypt. And he says, that's Palestine. That's Syria. That's all of it right there. In his Histories, Book 3, he describes the Persian Empire's 5th satrapy as containing all of Phoenicia, Palestine, Syria, and Cyprus. So he's mentioning all these same places. In Book 2 of his Histories, he notes that the Phoenicians and Syrians of Palestine acknowledged that they learned the custom of circumcision from the Egyptians. Then in Book 7, he writes about this part of Syria, and all the region extending from here to Egypt is known by the name of Palestine. So again and again, he's referring to Palestine as what it is, as what we call it now. It's all the same lands, it's all the same places, even in 450 BC, written by Herodotus, not by any Jew. Now, Plato, in the same time period, about 400 BC, repeatedly references Egypt and Phoenician cities as real visitable places in the Eastern Mediterranean. In Timaeus, his writing named Timaeus, he describes the Athenian statesman Solon traveling to Sais, a city in the Egyptian delta, to converse with the Egyptian priests. He mentions a journey from Greece to North Africa across, and he never mentions crossing the Atlantic. In Phaedrus, another of his writings, he names a Greek trading colony in Egypt as the home of the god Thoth and identifies Thebes. So all these different locations in Egypt being verified again by Plato. He also mentions the Phoenician cities of Tyre and Sidon right there on the coast of the Mediterranean, just slightly northwest of Israel. And he mentions them in his writing The Republic and his writing The Laws. So many mentions of these places by Plato 400 years before Christ. Then we come to Aristotle in the year, let's say about 360 BC, 360 years before Christ. He independently also confirms the Middle Eastern geography of the biblical world. In his book 2 of his meteorology writing, he explicitly mentions Palestine by name and describes a lake in Palestine whose water is so salty that nothing sinks in it. This is obviously a very distinct reference to the Dead Sea that we saw in pictures earlier, that has mounds of salt next to it and is so salty that things don't sink in it and fish don't live in it. Now, that cannot be said for the same places that people try to make the Dead Sea over in North America. But here we have Aristotle, 350 years before Christ, telling you where these places are because he had gone there. It's ridiculous to think he went to North America to write these writings. Nobody in his time went to North America. Now, some Roman sources. The Roman historian Tacitus, in about 70 AD or so, one of Rome's greatest historians, describes Judea, Jerusalem, and the Jewish people in detail in his Histories, Book 5. He writes about the Roman siege of Jerusalem in 70 AD, and Tacitus calls Jerusalem the capital of the Jews and has a temple. It mentions the temple. He mentions everything about Jerusalem and its destruction. Provides an extended excursus on Jewish customs, origins, and religion, placing it all firmly in the Levant and Palestine. In his Annals, his writing called the Annals, section 15, verse 44, he refers to Christus being executed under Pontius Pilate, Jesus Christ being executed by Pilate, the Roman procurator of Judea during the reign of Tiberius. He mentions all of this. Tacitus was a Roman senator with access to imperial archives. He had no reason to fabricate the location of Judea or to say anything other than the truth. His account places the events of the New Testament, guess where? In the Middle East. Pliny the Elder, the Roman naturalist in about 60 AD, describes Judea and Jerusalem in his Encyclopedic Natural History, Book 5. He calls Jerusalem by far the most famous city of the East, not of the West, which is the Americas. Jerusalem is the most famous city of the East. And this is not a Jew, he is a Roman. These are all Romans. They're not Jews. In fact, they didn't like the Jews very much. Then, of course, we do have Josephus, who was a Jewish commander turned Roman historian. And, of course, his Jewish Antiquities and his Wars of the Jews, 12 volumes. He provides the most comprehensive ancient account of Jewish history of that time period. And in painstaking detail describes the geography of Judea, Galilee, Samaria, the Jordan River, Dead Sea, Jerusalem, its temple. It's all there. It's all connected. It's all connected to places outside the biblical lands, like Rome, like Greece, like Turkey, like Egypt. He connects it all. So why would there be most of his writings taking place in the Middle East, but then some of them taking place in North America? It makes no sense, and there's no way you can prove that Rome was in North America. You can't prove that Egypt is in North or South America. That's nonsense. Now, there's Persian sources, and I'll just mention these. I'm going to try to go quickly, man. I know this is long, but that's because there's so much. The Cyrus Cylinder from 539 BC, a Babylonian cuneiform inscription created by Cyrus the Great after he conquered Babylon. It does not name Jerusalem or the Jews specifically, but describes the same imperial policy that the book of Ezra in chapter 1 credits with allowing the Jews to return and rebuild their temple. It was excavated at Babylon in modern Iraq in 1879. It's now in the British Museum. The Behustan inscription, 520 BC, a massive multilingual rock relief carved into a cliff face in where? North America? No. In Michigan? No. It's carved into a side of a cliff facing western Iraq by the Persian king Darius I. Written in Old Persian and Elamite, and in Babylonian cuneiform, it lists the provinces of the Persian Empire and records his military campaigns. He's the same king in Ezra chapter 6. So, in summary of all of this, these are independent ancient sources from all sorts of different places and peoples and nations. This chain of independent corroboration is so interlocked. Like, you can't even pull one out from the other because they all mention the same things and they connect. It's like it's not like just a puzzle. It's like a 3D puzzle that's all stacked on top and connected perfectly. And you can't unwind part of it and say, no, the biblical lands are over in America. because that breaks all of everything. It's broken, and there's no evidence for it. The cumulative weight of these sources is just devastating to this theory. Devastating. And we're talking about also a timeline from Egyptian to Assyrian to Babylonian to Persian to Greek to Roman. This spans 2,000 years of literature that was all pointing at the same geography and saying, yes, this is the land of these people. This is the land of these people. This is where they lived. This is where the Dead Sea is. This is where the biblical cities were. Thousands of years of archaeological facts, archaeological finds, literature that's been found. It's undeniable. All right. Now, I want to talk about this because just a little more before we're finished. And that is this idea because, I went to, some of you who are watching this will know what I'm talking about, but I went to another person's video that's very recent that is, of course, supporting this view that Israel is in America, in the Americas, and that the biblical lands are in North America and South America. And I went there and I put some comments saying that I didn't believe that was true at all, and I thought that this was pretty much a waste of people's time. Now, that's a little harsh, but I'm kind of a harsh person, especially when I think something is as vapid as this. And so I got a somewhat harsh response, which is okay. I'm used to it, from the person who made the video. And I chastised this person for acting like the Jews could have so much power. I essentially said, for those who believe that the Jews are so powerful, like gods, that they can completely rewrite our history, all of it, not just little things like, what happened during the war or, the history of their little nation, over there, their modern nation, or anything like, not little tweaks or corruptions, but these people think that the Jews are so grandly powerful, like gods, that they are able to entirely rewrite history and no one be the wiser. They think that they are so powerful they can just pick up the biblical lands from North America and throw them over in the Middle East and make the entire world believe it over thousands of years. Now, I had to respond to that in this comment stream that you give them too much credit. You give the Jews a little too much credit if you think they're that powerful. I mentioned that you must think they are like gods to be able to do this type of thing and deceive so well. And of course, then I was chastised for being a shill for the Jews by this person, which of course I did not appreciate. I don't think this person has any idea what I think of the Jews, has no conception of the countless videos I've done on the corruption of the Jews in the modern time. However, I don't credit the Jews with being so godlike that they can change everything about our history and take facts that are verified by multiple sources over multiple millennia from multiple nations and multiple peoples, and just these people throw all that out. And they say that the Jews are able to just bury all that? I'm sorry, that is nonsense. You're giving the Jews too much credit. They aren't worth it. Trust me. They were not able to change the location of the biblical lands in our historical narrative. Nobody's been able to do that. Now, of course, they have shifted things. Did you not know that the Jews have slightly corrupted the texts of the Bible? The Masoretic text that was written by Jews in the 10th century, it was obviously corrupted, but what we saw, because we could compare it to the text that was before it, was that there were only slight corruptions. They were trying to trick you. It wasn't that they took the whole thing and rewrote it. They changed small things to hope you wouldn't notice. And that's exactly what Jews do in almost every scenario. They try to corrupt things. They twist them a little bit. They do not have the godlike powers of changing everything. They are not that powerful. I'm sorry. So to those that, will laugh at everything I have gone through in this video and say, no, you just don't understand. The Jews did it all. It's all the Jews. I'm sorry, but you are letting your hatred blind you. And I'm not going to use the word anti-Semitism because that's not what it is. It is literal hatred. It has blinded you from seeing the truth. You are blinded by hatred for these people. Now, can I blame you for disliking them? No, I cannot. But we cannot let our hatred or our despising of people or their corruption or just our, disgust with their, their leaders and their rulers. We can't let that push us to a place where we abandon all reason. Okay? And that's what has happened with this whole concept. The idea that the biblical lands are in America. Ridiculous. And I'm sorry if you believe that and you're mad at me for saying that's ridiculous. But we just went through, an hour and a half of literal fact after fact after fact that has been found that debunks that theory completely and holistically. Like, this is one of the worst things I've ever tried to debunk, and the only reason I'm even doing it is because I care about some of the people that I think are being tricked by this type of concept into believing something that's just nonsense. There's no logical reasoning for it. So that just to say, I think I will stop there in this video for today. I didn't want to do this video. I didn't want to do this at all. I think it's ridiculous. But I'm doing it for the people I care about that might be out there wondering, like, is this thing true? That don't have the background of this archaeological evidence to combat it in their mind. Because it must be combated. It must be fought. It's nonsensical, and it makes us look like fools. And I mean, that's kind of a consensus, type argument, but I mean, along with all the evidence we've just looked through, this makes us look like fools if we think that, the biblical lands have just been totally uprooted and they're a totally different part of the world. For one, it doesn't make any sense. It actually destroys the Bible itself, because the Bible has a cohesive view of the Middle East. So I'm just putting this out as a warning. We cannot believe every little thing that comes out in the truther movement on YouTube, online. Everything, every TikTok fad that comes out. Just because, a few people see it and they go, oh, that doesn't mean it's real. We got to do the work, people. We've got to do the work. I've now done the work. I probably presented at least 50 or more pieces of evidence that are real. They're tangible. You could go over to a museum and you could see them for yourself. But the problem is you can't go to a museum in North America to see them because they aren't there. None of them were found here. All of the artifacts, all of the evidence, these 6-foot-high graphite steles from Babylon, they are in Babylon. They're in the Middle East, and they refer to Israel and Palestine. They refer to the Middle East. So, I hope this is helpful for you guys. I hope that you've seen, what I'm talking about here. I hope that rationally you come to this understanding that, wow, the evidence is really overwhelming. I mean, I don't know why I have to say it, but it's truly overwhelming. But I just don't understand why people will watch a video that says the biblical lands are probably in America, and then it shows some maps with things painted on it that don't belong there. And they may look good, but there's no evidence to support them. So did any of the people that saw those videos then take any time to say to themselves, well, What do the archaeological artifacts look like that actually do prove the Middle East as the biblical lands? What are the artifacts? Do I even know? Have I ever looked up the Mesha Stele or the Lachish letters, or the Amarna letters, or the reliefs in Thebes from the pharaohs? I mean, do you know about this stuff? Now you do. Make an informed opinion, an informed, rational argument for what you believe. But don't point to a YouTube video that's just throwing assertion after assertion on top of no evidence whatsoever. In the end, I'm just trying to help. I'm just trying to give you what I know to be the truth. God bless you in your research on this topic.